Dune is a story that's been waiting a long time for a proper adaptation. It had one in 1984, but director David Lynch considers it to be the only failure of his otherwise masterful career. There was a lovely miniseries done by the Sci-Fi Channel in 2000 that got as far as the storyline of Children of Dune, but with massive budget restraints that definitely show in the final work. In spite of that, it remained a favorite with Dune fans for its faithfulness to the original book. Almost 2 decades after the last adaptation, Dune has finally hit theaters and become the cultural touchstone it's long deserved to be. We now have both visual spectacle and fidelity, wrapped in an emotionally charged story that hits hard, one that's heady, capturing the complexity of Frank Herbert's world in a way that's still understandable for general audiences. The first video in this series of reviews will be spoiler-free, intended for those who have not read the book, and the second will dive into the details for you longtime fans, because I have a lot to say. Real quick though, if you're intending to watch Dune, I highly recommend you watch this primer I put together before you see the movie. There are no spoilers, and it explains a lot of things that are left unexplored in the film. Curious how this surreal future world is related to and connects with our own? Give it a watch. If you prefer to watch it after seeing the movie, it'll still be here to answer all the questions you'll undoubtedly have if you haven't read the book. So let's get to it. Dune is unlike any movie I've ever seen before in my life. I walked out of the theater both underwhelmed and perfectly satisfied. Not disappointed, just underwhelmed. It wasn't as good as I had hoped, but it was still really, really good. It took me a while to realize this. Because I was so familiar with the source material, my first viewing was spent observing how faithful the film was to the book, and I walked out of the theater thinking, yep, that was Dune. But I was also left with the feeling that some potential was missed. There wasn't a particular feeling of being blown away, just the deep satisfaction of finally being able to immerse myself in the world that existed only in my imagination for so long. I was left feeling a little let down by the acting, which is unfortunate given the caliber of actors in this film, but they did all do a serviceable job. Timothy's fear at realizing who he's becoming during one scene is pronounced, but the performances that really jumped out at me were Javier Bardem and the relatively unknown Babs Olusanmoken, who both dominate every scene they're in. Now, with some time between myself and my first viewing, I'm beginning to realize just how monumental an accomplishment this film is. It's not perfect by any means, but it's one of the most faithful adaptations of Herbert's work that we could have asked for. If someone watches this film who hasn't read the book, I would say that they understand at least the fundamental aspects of Dune on a purely introductory level, with one big exception that I'll get to in my second video. Dune isn't something that can be conveyed through story alone. Simply translating the book's obvious elements to the screen isn't a recipe for success, because Dune is a book that manages to do what many others do not. It shows you all the pieces, but requires you to connect the dots yourself. It has a lot in common with Eastern forms of art like the haiku, which implies meaning between the lines, rather than overtly on the surface. And between those lines is a deep world of shadows, dreams, and myths. It's well and good to have spaceships, sandworms, and alien planets translated to the screen, but if you miss the subtext, you haven't captured the essence of Dune. And that makes Denis Villeneuve's accomplishment with this film all the more staggering. The subtext is there, but, like the book, it requires you to search for it a little. Dune Part 1 benefits immensely from its creator's willingness to take some liberties with the source material, but never at the expense of overshadowing the original content. Seeing old scenes in new ways, or new interpretations of what else might exist within Dune's world, is amazing, striking the right balance between surprise and faithfulness. Dune isn't a perfect film. Its fealty to the source material means that, at times, it sacrifices structure or pacing for a lot of necessary exposition, but it's one that almost perfectly captures the experience of reading the book. And it is unrelenting. Once things start going wrong, the tension just keeps building and building till the end of the film. In many ways, I'm envious of people who get to experience the film without having read the book, and then, wanting to know more, can dive into the rich world that Herbert has already laid out for them. The book is perhaps best known for its depth of world building. Frank Herbert is most often held up alongside Tolkien as one of the master world builders of literature. For this adaptation, instead of attempting to break down and explain everything in the world, The film is content to merely show you all of these elements without explanation, opening filmgoers to the same sense of wonder and mystery that readers are greeted with when they first open the book. In this way, it perfectly captures the feeling of stepping into this strange world for the first time. Previous adaptations have failed to showcase the breadth of Frank Herbert's world building. This adaptation works so well because it doesn't even try to. It just immerses you in the world and lets you witness and wonder. Only the most important plot details are explained, and they're explained in such a straightforward way that pretty much anyone could understand them. There's a tiny bit of hand-holding, but that's okay, because it's done so as not to aggravate the knowledgeable in the audience. To hit the proper runtime for a theatrical release, it was also necessary to condense, and they condensed in all the right ways, never sacrificing crucial details. You can plainly see where establishing and transitional shots were removed, and there are lines of dialogue referencing scenes that just aren't there. But none of this impacts the flow of the film or the intensity and resonance of its story. It's just noticeable. Like The Lord of the Rings before it, it's obvious that this director cares immensely about the world of Dune, and wanted to let audiences spend as much time in it as he could. For that reason, this is also a film that's begging for a director's cut. Villeneuve has stated he doesn't believe in director's cuts, but for the sake of Dune fans, I hope he changes his mind. I was shocked to find that my favorite sequences from the film were not exciting events like the sandworm attack, which was the director's favorite, but the simple moments like an ornithopter starting up, which, on IMAX speakers, felt like there was an actual helicopter spinning up in the room, or the guttural intensity of a sermon delivered before troops depart for battle, or the peace of drifting high above a sandstorm after a fatal escape. I will say, some of the visuals did get to be a little redundant after a while. After hopping halfway across the universe to another planet, it was dismaying to see the same tans, browns, and dark grays. Seriously, everything was dark gray. While the weirdness of Dune was definitely on display here, I felt like it was a missed opportunity not to use this to create a little more visual variety. The dialogue was much more natural in its delivery in this version, although at times this made characters hard to understand because they were speaking so fast or mumbling. So go in knowing you'll have to listen intently if you want to understand everything that's being said.
You must do everything the Reverend Mother does.
But for the alien languages you're not supposed to understand, subtitles are provided, borrowing a technique from Lucas's playbook by having some characters speak in guttural languages, replicating that feel of foreign exoticism to wonderful effect. But that leads us into the best part of this movie by far, which is the sound design. From the music to the sound effects, this is a film that relishes in spending every minute barraging you with the intensity of its world. Denis Villeneuve's usual style of brutalism that most often comes through in his works in scenes of violence is, with a few exceptions, relegated to the musical background of the film. The music is where the attitude of Frank Herbert shines through. What could normally be communicated through what's referred to as artistic voice in a literary language must instead be translated to the emotional fabric of the film, which is what Hans Zimmer does with his soundtrack. This film feels so confident in itself that it's even willing to lay heavy-hitting fanfare over offbeats in the story, and he's clearly accomplished something here that rivals Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings soundtrack in depth and scope of musical world-building. But that's not to say this soundtrack is anything like that of Lord of the Rings. The score for Dune instead embraces its dreamlike weirdness and mythic intensity. Ultimately, I think what matters most is how viewers who have not read the book respond to this movie. That's actually the experience I'm most interested in hearing about, so if you've watched the film and previously had no exposure to Dune, I definitely want to hear from you in the comments below. Please tell me in as much detail what this experience was like for you going in so fresh. I want to live vicariously for a moment, and recapture those feelings of discovering Dune for the first time. And with this first spoiler-free review completed, I'll remind you one more time that if you have yet to see Dune, please check out my primer before going to watch it, and then come back here and let me know what you thought. If you're interested in checking out part 2 of this review, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss when I upload that video. And be sure to check out all the other videos that I've produced so far for Offscreen. And lastly, Offscreen has a Patreon page where you can help offset some of the financial costs of producing these videos, and help me release content much faster. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next video.